Welcome, everyone, to our August College Connections, which is held live at Ag Progress Days. This monthly series is designed to give you a unique inside perspective of the people, programs, priorities, and partnerships of the Penn State College of Agricultural Sciences. I'm Rick Roush. I'm the Dean of the College, and I'm excited to welcome you to Ag Progress Days, and I'll serve as host for this session. Before we begin, we're offering this session both in person and via Zoom. Please note that we are recording the session as we do for all of these, and we'll be sharing the link of the recording on our College Connections website. Today's College Connections is a town hall discussions of the state of Pennsylvania agriculture. And I'm joined today by the Secretary of the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture, Russell Redding. Thank you for being here, Russell. After brief opening remarks, we'll be addressing questions from both our online and in-person audiences. Some of you included questions in your registration, and we will address those first, either in our opening remarks or in the Q&A that follows. If time permits, we'll take questions from the floor or from the Q&A link on the Zoom. And if you're going to want to ask questions, you'll find microphones in front of you. So with that, let's get right to it. I would like to welcome Secretary Redding here today and ask you to go first and set the stage with your opening remarks, Secretary.
Dean Roush, thank you, and good morning, everybody. Good to see you. Always good to be with Dean Roush and the Penn State team during Ag Progress Days. Particularly, it's just a good reminder to all of us of the land grant mission, and it sort of comes together here on the grounds of Ag Progress Days, where we see the research and extension and teaching and learning all sort of combined. That was the original vision, all right? And I feel like every Ag Progress Days is a reminder of both the history and our past, the progress that we've made, but also the future, and how we solve some of the big issues of our time are found in the work of Penn State, the land grant mission and university, but also among this community. Ag Progress Days is also one of the ways that we mark time in this Commonwealth, right? You feel like when you get to Ag Progress Days, you know it's August, you know the weather is going to change, maybe not as severely as it has, but welcomed after the summer that we've had. You also know that school is not too far away. We have a pretty good sense of what the crops look like across the Commonwealth. And you have a sense of what this budget contains, right? At this point, which is good.
We have a sense, but we're still looking for the payoff.
We have, that's why I said a sense of the budget. So yes. But thinking about the word progress, and I like this event because it sort of forces, in a way, for us to sort of confront what progress have we made, right? And I think the word progress is intentional in the title of this, and I use it as a moment to sort of look at what we've done, what we need to do. But I think about the last year, and certainly at a personal level, what we've done to keep expanding the definition of agriculture. I've seen it across the state of Pennsylvania in places that zip codes would normally not define agriculture and success there, but we've seen it, right? We continue to see the inclusivity and diversity of agriculture in so many ways, which is important. We see it in terms of who is agriculture, what is agriculture, and where is agriculture. We have implemented more conservation planning in the last year than we have previously. We've contained and suppressed and kept our high path AI at bay. Of course, we're in this pause for the moment, but just a tremendous amount of work done last year on high path AI. We continue to expand markets both domestically and internationally. We have more farmers under the age of 35 than any other state in the nation, which I think is an important statement. We have preserved more land. We have more investments because of the Pennsylvania Farm Bill and the Federal Farm Bill, and more to come. But we also know in this work of progress, there's more to do, right? You're never quite done, right? That is a story of agriculture in our history. We have to continue to diversify our farms and food processing, both from the standpoint of responding to the needs of society, but also to stay competitive and take full advantage of the innovation that's available to us. We have to continue to combat the foreign animal diseases and invasive species. They are upon us in so many ways and show up in both the landscape, but also in the economics and jobs and concerns. We have to retain, attract, and inspire a new generation to do this work. It is contemporary concern, but just would say to everybody, we have to continue to think about who's here in the positions of leadership, also in our businesses and on our farms as well. We have to address food insecurity in a state that is blessed in so many ways with abundance of production. We still have this dichotomy of those who are food insecure. And for anybody who's in the business of producing food and fiber, we understand the value of food, the need of everybody who needs it to have access to it. And nobody in this state should go hungry, right? We have to continue to work at that. And last, we have to continue to implement more conservation to address both the water quality, the climate, and our soil health. I mean, it's just one of the things we have to do. The other P, progress is one, partnerships is the second, right? You can't do anything that I've just mentioned. You can't make the progress that we've made without partnerships, right? And they show up in this room, they show up in these grounds. It's critical. We see it everywhere we go, that we all want to feel independent. The reality is that we're connected, and connected in ways that sometimes aren't always obvious, right? The research is done here at Penn State and how it appears on the landscapes is part of that. What appears in our city centers in terms of food and food access is a partnership. So every fair, every farm, every business I go to, rural or urban, partnerships define us. Certainly with our partnership with Penn State, we are a better state and we are a better department or a better industry because of the work of Penn State and the land grant mission. It shows up for us on spotted lanternflies and pollinators and high path AI and chronic wasting disease. Make your list of contemporary concern or issue that we deal with in Penn State is in the center of that conversation with us. So again, a note of thanks to all. So in short, we are a better state for the work that we do with Penn State. So I'm excited about this week. I'm excited about our future in agriculture, notwithstanding the headwinds that we see and feel on a daily basis. It's one of the hallmarks of this business is the long view that we take in the business, right? It is not always about today or this week. It's not always about the year that we're living and in some cases, even the generation we're part of, right? The things we think about are those that are long-term and sustainability. And I think it's really important statement of what we value. When we look at the state and the farmland preservation, more farms preserved in this nation, this state than anywhere else in the nation. Right? And more young farmers under the age of 35, you start building this sort of model. And I like our chances, right? Got a lot to offer. So anyhow, a note of thanks to all for both the progress and the partnerships with Penn State and in this community. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary. You've foreshadowed several things. Yeah. You've foreshadowed several things I want to talk about. So I have to say one of the big stories this year is what? Climate change. I mean, the Eastern United States has now experienced darkened skies the way the West has for many years. We've had just massive fires across Canada, heat waves across the southern United States. Just in the last couple of days, strong storm warnings all across the northeastern United States. It's all happening. The climate change models predict generally higher temperatures, but much more extreme weather, floods followed by droughts, and so it goes. And so what are we doing about this in agriculture? Well, Pennsylvania, over the last many decades, has been one of the leaders in the country in adopting no-till and cover cropping in its agriculture. It was the primary driver for that was water quality, which we'll come back to later. But the same techniques also do a lot to try to keep carbon, nitrogen, nitrous oxide, methane in the soil, or the components of it, and keep it as well as keeping out of the waterways. So when Secretary Tom Vilsack, USDA Secretary Tom Vilsack, announced the Climate Smart Agriculture Grant Program, I immediately pounced on it. And I think I wrote first to Blair Siegfried and said, we've got to get one of these things. We're the top 10% in the country in terms of having no-till and cover cropping. In contrast to everybody else, we're already there in terms of doing these tactics. What we need now is to harness some of the rewards for the growers in Pennsylvania. And so Blair and his team were successful in landing a $25 million Climate Smart grant. Not only that, but Secretary Vilsack chose Penn State to come to make the announcements and have a roundtable of all the others in Pennsylvania that did it. But from our one of our buildings, he made the announcement across the United States on that date. So it was great recognition for us. So one of the important things we have to do is reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And as I said, agriculture can play and does play a major role in that already. But we also have to think something about how we're going to adapt to this, because it's clearly coming and we're not going to be able to turn it around quickly. So what should we do next? And I think this is a place where Pennsylvania has a unique role. With rising temperatures in the southern United States, it won't be possible to maintain animal agriculture in the way it's being done already. And that's going to have to move somewhere. And I think there's a great opportunity for this in Western Pennsylvania. We don't want to have more animal agriculture building in the southeastern part of the state, where we've already got the twin problems of vulnerability to disease outbreaks and how to manage the waste. We should try to explore how we could expand agriculture in Western Pennsylvania, where we'll have the advantages over much of the rest of the country of, on average, adequate water and cooler temperatures for production. So I think it's a great opportunity, and it's the sort of thing Pennsylvania needs to do to address these problems. We know that the world's food, as a global matter, the world food chain is in a tight spot as Russia's war against Ukraine has shown. We're taking out, effectively taking out large swaths of two of the major world bread baskets. Just on this morning's news on Reuters, it was announced that the Ukrainian government is polling its farmers as what kind of planning they're going to try to do. And many of them are shifting from corn production to oils, because there's more profit, and it's a smaller thing to try to move around. You're less likely to have somebody drop missiles on 60,000 tons of grain and burn it overnight if you have it spread out in other places. So the world market is going to shift, and this is going to be a shift that's going to go on for years. But it'll go on for years after this war ends, whenever it ends. But the problems of trying to restore that kind of production, the world food market is going to go on, is going to be a problem that's going to linger for decades. The fields are full of unexploded bombs. They've been poisoned by the explosions, the explosive substances themselves, and so it goes. So those are opportunities that we should be looking more closely at. And to get there, we need to invest in the future. So in the last Farm Bill, there was a section called the Research Facilities Act, to help recognize and try to address the fact that across the United States, audited surveys have shown that we're $11.5 billion behind in maintaining agricultural research facilities and land grants. Now, if you think about the overall budget, federal budget, $11.5 billion is kind of a round off error. But really trying to get that kind of money into the Farm Bill is a big challenge, and one that G.T. Thompson has been trying to deal with. And we can talk with him more about that during the week. There's also a lot of emerging technology that we should look at, and we'll talk about that more. But one other thing I wanted to come to is regulation. So as it happens, we've now had genetically modified crops out for more than 30 years. In fact, if we've been driving into the site here, if the averages around here are the same as the rest of the nation, 94% of those crops carry 2 Bt genes for controlling caterpillars, probably 2 more for corn rootworms, and probably herbicide resistance. Now, part of the reason I want to emphasize the 2 is one of my research projects in the early 90s, both in computer modeling and then in collaborative experiments I did with friends at Cornell using the Diamondback model, demonstrated that the best way to delay resistance in these situations was to deploy 2 genes simultaneously that had different modes of action in the same crop. And in the United States, that's worked well. Since crops were released in the 1990s, we still don't have any resistance in European corn borer, for example, in the United States. In Arizona, they successfully eradicated the pink bollworm by using the same kinds of techniques. India didn't use 2 genes and ended up with pink bollworm that were resistant to their Bt crops. So we've had a 30-year-long experiment to test laboratory models and computer simulation, and it's worked. So I ask you, if you think about it, at the time there was huge worries about the implications for the environment and human health of releasing these crops. Where are those problems today? Did anybody heard anybody protesting around the corn around here? They amounted to nothing after all that time. And yet the regulatory framework is still the same, preventing people from adopting them in the United States for minor crops and around the world. So one of my colleagues, the guy I worked with on the dimeback moth, Tony Shelton, engaged in a project in Bangladesh to release eggplants that had the Bt genes in them. And they've reduced insecticide use for the people that use them by 90 to 95%. A tremendous success story. So why aren't they getting used more places? The regulatory system in India doesn't like it. It's taken a long time to move it in the Philippines. The fact that the U.S. has still employed this overly zealous regulatory program is actually inhibiting the adoption of technology in other places in the world where people can use it. So that's another thing. It's sort of my ticket to talk to the Farm Bill people about is it's probably time to sunset a lot of those rules. They haven't generated any net benefit. So with that, I think it's probably time for me to move on to the questions. And the first question we were asked was, how can we do a better job of putting Pennsylvania agriculture on the map? Being PA's #1 industry, it does not get enough credit. What do you think, Secretary?
It's hard to answer. Where to start, I guess I would say. It's a fair question. I think all of us look at the industry that we're part of and want it to be respected for what it provides, right? And make sure that all of those components of the industry are recognized for the contributions we make and they make to both the economy of the state, what we do in terms of the quality of life in this Commonwealth, what contributions we make on the conservation side. And it never seems to be enough, right? I would just say that we're at that task every day, and certainly at events like Ag Progress Days provide those opportunities. It is also what our fairs do and our farm show and state-sponsored shows. But I'm also mindful that every time that I look at the news, what is on social media, the best stories are those who are actually, who are on their farms doing their work, telling their story. Is the most powerful story, right? We can do a lot of things to elevate that work and make sure it's recognized and amplified. But at the end of the day, the personal stories of families and progress that they're making are the most powerful stories. And how you provide that, how do we push those kind of stories out is important. I say that because it's not simply a responsibility of a university or the Department of Agriculture. That's the collective responsibility and challenge that we have of telling that story of agriculture. We are doing it at a program level, though. I mean, to say the work that the Hardwood Development Council does as an example, and the hardwood utilizations do across the state is part of the story. What we do in the PA Preferred program to talk about PA products and give that identity in the marketplace is part of the story. The work that we do in the Farm Bill with specialty crops, the work of Ag Business Development Center is part of the story. What commodity groups do with their own checkoff dollars, I think is a really important, powerful part of the story, right? Individual dollars put out of their pocket and paychecks to promote their industry as part of the story. So there's a lot inside that we do currently, but there's also more that we can do. And it's no secret. I think the number of folks who are involved in agriculture, production agriculture particularly, continues to shrink. Our capacity and strength and productivity expand. We have to continue to engage, and we've got to do that. We have to look at that as part of our duty as being in this industry. We've got to continue to do that. The second part is, and we struggle with this all the time, is how you define agriculture. The production piece is easy. When we did the impact study a couple of years ago, we were very intentional about redefining ag, and to be inclusive, which it should be, it is. But we also have to get all of those sort of segments to tell their piece of the story, right? I would love to see the retailers and the restaurants and the folks who are connected to the food system to be part of the conversation, right? Those who are in the green industry in all forms to be part of that, the equine industry. So that is the challenge, I think, to all of you and to us, is that we have to keep sort of including who is agriculture, keep defining it publicly, but also set forth an expectation of what we want them to do. And I think that's a piece that we ought to just keep working at, have to keep working at to get to the point where, as the question says, how do we do a better job of promoting agriculture in the state? Top line will be making sure that it delivers on the promises that we've set forth for society, right? That is most important. And how do we share that, engage people in that conversation is important.
Thank you, Secretary. I want to point out that Secretary Redding is all in on this because some time ago, I was wandering through my neighborhood, a supermarket. I'm not sure if I can give the name of the supermarket, but the initials are Weiss. And all of a sudden I heard Secretary Redding's voice. I was like, somebody was announcing something. I thought, wait, Wait, that's Secretary Redding.
No, I ran for the exit.
No, I did not. Anyhow, how many others have had that experience and been shocked to hear? At least a few. Okay. Well, what are the agricultural initiatives that exist or are being considered in Pennsylvania to encourage local food purchasing?
Yeah, there's a lot. Again, it's like the first question. Local food purchasing, again, is something we have desired for a long time. It's where, success is found for many of our farms. There is a reason that we have, 1,100 farm markets and number 3 in the nation in direct farm sales. There's a lot of activity there, right? And that sort of local access is important. We have worked with our PA Preferred program to give that identity in the marketplace, as I mentioned. I think that's part of it. The USDA, if you're watching closely the last year and what the Biden administration has done, and Secretary Vilsack has announced a number of investments in the food system, both in terms of capacity building, which is part of this conversation about how do you develop the value-added markets and on-farm opportunities. Cooperative development has been part of that. We have focused on this at the small meat processing. We think is an important part. We hear it every day. There simply aren't enough small meat processors in the state of Pennsylvania to satisfy the local meat market and protein consumption. But that's a part of it. The specialty crop block grants that we've both at the federal level who've invested, but also at the state through our PA Farm Bill is part of that. There are 2 cooperative agreements that the Department of Agriculture has been awarded most recently. One is a local foods procurement cooperative agreement that will invest about $28 million. It's a 3-year program. There's a stage 2 sort of installment to that, but at the end of the day, that'll be for working at this local capacity building and purchasing of foods, particularly to be funneled into the charitable food system. And then a second one that looks at the local foods for schools. And that is, again, something many school boards and administrators have expressed to us about the opportunity to provide local sourcing as part of their school breakfast, school lunch program. So we've been awarded a $6.5 million fund for subgranting to school food authorities, which means, school districts in Pennsylvania. So that's just 2. On top of that, there is a resilient food system infrastructure program that is part of the USDA. And we have in this budget, Governor Shapiro, the administration just provided the fresh food financing initiative, which will invest in that local capacity building. And we discovered over the years, particularly during COVID, is that some of the needs are fairly basic. It's about refrigeration. It's about food. It's about whether you have the people and the facilities lined up where you need them, whether it's farmers markets and broadband, or if it's refrigeration at a local food bank or whatever. But the fresh food financing initiative will be available in this budget. And our hope is that we can do some of that capacity building for, again, to the question about how do you help to encourage the local food purchasing. Yeah.
Thanks. So one of the next questions that was submitted is, what can Penn State do to ensure that it can meet the industry's demand for the next generation of procurement foresters? So that one's directed, I figured, pretty much at me. We're very aware that the forest products industry is worth $19 billion in Pennsylvania, which I think makes it the largest agriculture industry by a lot. So in the Department of Ecosystem Science and Management, we're finishing a curriculum modernization to continue in Penn State's long tradition of generation of foresters with a world-class education. We've undertaken this review and revision with input from stakeholders, students, faculty, and other forestry programs. And as an illustration of the demonstration forestry, we've hired new faculty members and have plans for additional hires. This year, we had the largest career fair with 25 employers present. It was representing everybody from consulting forestry firms to looking at summer hires and also the NRCS. So we understand that a procurement forester has to be competent in silviculture, dendrology, mensuration, statistics, logging, road and trail layout, some understanding of courthouse research, how to grade logs and lumber along with markets for each product. So there's a lot of things there that are probably not in our standard university curriculum. And I expect that as we are doing so much of extension, we have extension training programs, some with certificates to do on the job training, even for people who are already out there. So this is an area that seems ripe for trying to do more things like that. I should say that we're very interested in the butcher small markets, and have been trying to support butcher schools, but it's one of those areas where it's a challenge of trying to find the funding and the size resources needed to do it to the scale that's required. But those are the kinds of things we're looking at in terms of non-traditional education. So it's going to be probably a lot of this training is going to be a combination of classrooms, internships, extension certificates, and so forth. So with that, I think the next question I can pass back to Secretary Redding. What is your position on clean and green farmland being turned over for solar fields and/or transmission lines?
Did you write there?
No.
So clean and green, right? So everybody knows what clean and green is. We've got about 10 million acres in Pennsylvania that are enrolled in clean and green. It is one of the earliest sort of conservation/preservation programs of the Commonwealth, right? It was designed to do two things. One, in exchange for not developing your land and basically keeping it clean and green, we would, as a Commonwealth, provide a discounted tax value for that property. And two is that you would, by entering it, remain true to that principle, right? And so we have the value of giving encouraging land to be included, but it comes with an obligation. And that is in exchange for reduction in taxing obligation. You enter a covenant with the Commonwealth to keep that land open, right? And I think that's an important principle. It predates the work that we did on our preservation program. And it's worked wonderfully well. And there's the size and all kinds of considerations. To the point, though, that we now have this influx of solar interest in Pennsylvania. We had been confronted with the question about the allowance for solar on clean and green land. And to be clear, it is not allowed. It is one of the only energy uses in our Commonwealth that are not allowed on clean and green land. You cannot have solar. You can have solar for personal and business purpose, but not for community solar and for commercial. So I think we have to be careful with it. I'll just put it out there that in a state that leads the nation in farmland preservation, in a state that is under threat by single family housing and warehouses, in a state that is so many land use pressures, we need to look at the public policy of protecting that land as we stated in Clean and Green, and to make sure that we're aware of that and sensitive to it, give context to it, and that we look at it both from the standpoint of our energy security and food security. And we do believe, by the way, that you can find equilibrium between them. It's just being smart about where you apply solar and making sure that you're not putting it on your prime agricultural lands, right? There is a lot of other land across the state that is not in class 1 through 4, right? The class 1 through 4 are the highest productivity soils in the state. Let's try to protect that. We said by public ballot and back in 1987 that as a Commonwealth, we want to preserve those lands. So I think that's the context to leading to how do you accommodate solar on lands in Pennsylvania that may carry a preferential tax program and benefit by way of clean and green. So the short answer is not allowed today. Be cautious about where we apply an allowance of solar on clean and green. To do that, by the way, is going to remove the land from clean and green. I do not believe that you can do both. And that's one of the policy debates. Maybe I'm wrong at the end of the day, that there's a way with the agrivoltaics that you can actually do both. But as it stands today, you're using that for a commercial purpose, which is not the reason we put a preferential tax to the property owner to begin with, right? If it's a commercial enterprise, then it falls out of the preferential tax for clean and green. And that's a public policy debate.
So I'm often asked questions about this as well, and I'm happy to tell you that Penn State College is researching this as it does so many other things. So Stefan Getz has been looking into this. He's got a student who's currently interviewing farmers in Pennsylvania and neighboring states about how they're looking at it and trying to evaluate the literature on what impact does it have on communities and so forth. And essentially what I've learned from Stefan is that there's not that much research done on this yet, surprisingly. It's an open area to look and see what impact it has on communities when instead of producing bushels of corn, you've got photovoltaic cells and maybe less labor being required during the maintenance. So I'm sort of of the view that as well, why shouldn't we look? I know that the reason why they like farmland like this is they want to be to work on land that's easy to work to get things set up, and they need to be near power grids and so forth. But there must be other places we can do it. In the last over the weekend, I was driving through some of rural New York, and I noticed that on the interstate right-of-ways they had a lot of cells, and at some of the places where there were clover leaves, there were a lot of power cells set up in those, which seems like a pretty interesting model, and must be close to power grids as well, I imagine. So,
yeah, I think it's a great discussion. Clearly, every time that I talk about it with landowners, they remind me of private property rights. I understand that they have to make a decision about the use of that land, and that's important. Our consideration here is that just making sure that we're looking at the best places to put commercial scale solar. We've got a lot of reclaimed land in the state, right? Look at our history. There are wonderful places to put this solar that are accommodating, not without issues of water access and lines and so forth. But I think we can agree that this land is a defining trait for our agriculture and defining characteristic of our Commonwealth and quality of life here. Making sure that we are sensitive to, just as we are with the siting of agricultural buildings on our, in our agricultural enterprises, we take the same care and concern to site the solar, right? We have to be aware that there are neighbors who will look at certain solar arrays for their lifetime, right? And do they want to do that? Do they want to be surrounded by solar, right? What it is? Maybe. And maybe there are great and creative ways to accommodate on the agrivoltaics and do multi-species work and so forth. Not saying it's a bad idea. It just, I want folks to think about as our Commonwealth and a resource, where do you and how do you use it, right? And to what extent that we can guide that through land use policies, but also our energy policy as well. Final note, I mean, New Jersey did something that I like, and that is to require the warehouses post January 1 of this year to be able to accommodate solar. And to me, there's a logic in that, right? If you've got 1 million square feet of space, why not put it up there, right? The agriculture, there's a lot of buildings, a lot of roofs as we drive around that can accommodate, keep it off your prime land, right? I think it's so setting that expectation that there are more considerations to the conversation and things that we want to protect long-term, given the statement of public policy about the value of land and preservation of prime agricultural land, coupled with the dynamics we see in the Commonwealth with more young farmers than any other state in the nation, our access to 50 million people in the neighborhood. The long-term play is to make sure that we can play a significant role in food security. We protect our forests and those lands, but we also accommodate solar. It's just a question of where you put it in the Commonwealth. I think is part of the conversation we hope becomes part of this debate about clean and green and the 10 million acres that holds that preferential treatment. But also then what do you want to do as a Commonwealth with placement of solar for our use and the region's use? So thank you.
I should say it's certainly not a problem limited to Pennsylvania. California's had a big debate about this too. And one of their innovative solutions is that they've decided to put solar panels along the major agricultural canals, like the one that runs from Northern California, virtually Los Angeles. And the advantage that they think they're going to get from it is it includes reducing algal growth in the canals because they've got them shaded. So people are looking at creative solutions to address these problems. So one of the next questions we had was, how would less pollution from fossil fuel sources benefit crops and animals on and the water used in Pennsylvania farms? So there's frequently evidence that's reported on air pollution from fossil fuel sources as a threat to human health. And when they shut down, often people's breathing and respiratory diseases gets significantly reduced. So you'd have to expect the same would be true for livestock if you were using fossil fuels in their area. But I'm not aware of any specific data on it. But more broadly, the less CO2, methane, and nitrous oxide pollution from fossil fuel sources that we emit in the atmosphere will reduce atmospheric warming with much greater benefits for crops and animals that aren't so localized. And that's probably a major reason for looking at it. In fact, those who travel a lot, back in the 80s, Beijing, the air quality in Beijing was pretty terrible. And you might be aware that China is a leading adopter of solar cells. I suspect it's not because they were looking for energy alternatives, because they're still building coal plants all over the place. I'll bet that a big reason was to reduce air pollution in major cities. So there's a sort of probably a lesson there for all of us. So next question was, and I didn't write this one either, Secretary, millions of dollars have been spent on the Chesapeake Bay restoration to date. Is Pennsylvania on track to meet its 2025 Chesapeake Bay restoration program goals?
And
I think we agree that generally no, but it's looking better.
yes. Right. So thank you for the question, and absolutely right. I mean, we have spent a lot of money to address the issues of the Bay. As I don't get to the answer, but just to say that while we have focused on the Bay, it is probably an unfortunate, focus, right? Because the reality is that many folks don't think about the Bay; they think about the practice on their farm and their community. They look at their local streams, but all of those are tributaries too, right? So I think part of this has been the challenge of having both the task of reducing the nutrient flow onto the land and into these tributaries, ultimately to the Bay. The flip side is that because of that requirement that is set forth both under state law as well as the total maximum daily load (TMDL) established by the EPA, to me, we're a beneficiary of significant investments in conservation for purposes of water quality that maybe wouldn't have happened otherwise, right? I just put it out there, right? I think we all sort of focus on the Bay, and sometimes it's not always a positive story, just because none of us like to be told what to do, right? Particularly with our farms and fields. The reality is we have a collective responsibility to improve the water quality on our farms and our communities, and ultimately in the state and region in the watershed in Chesapeake Bay. The Bay has brought a focus to both the work of the Commonwealth, and we are part of this, significant part of this Commonwealth in the watershed. So there's a lot of work to do. The 2025, just for public awareness, was a dateline established for meeting the requirements of each state has a watershed implementation plan. We have one for the Commonwealth, and the question set forth is, will we as a Commonwealth meet the requirements for reduction of nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment by 2025? At least having all of the practices on the ground and deployed that will ultimately give us the reductions in nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment. The answer is no, we will not meet that 2025. I think it's generally recognized that we are now 2 years away, but we're making real progress. And I think that's the piece I want to keep underscoring, is given where we started some years ago, and you look at just the last the time horizon of 2009 to 2021, 49% reduction across the Bay watershed in nitrogen, a 64% reduction in phosphorus over that time, and 100% reduction in sediment since 2009 to 2021 inside the Bay watershed, right? So that's each of our states in the District of Columbia, as you think about this 64,000 square mile watershed. So we're not going to meet the 2025, but that is no reason to give up. The progress that we've made has been to the benefit of Pennsylvania. It's been to the benefit of our own communities. And we have to, by the way, keep advocating for the resources to get that job done. We're pleased, to have historic Clean Streams Fund funding. And as I look around, many of you are part of the success of that story to have the legislature and the governor secure those funds, $220 million to Pennsylvania. And we've made great progress. And you look at the best management practices being applied as a result of that funding. It has also drawn additional funding from the EPA and the reallocation of resources. It's put us in a great position to talk about what success looks like for conservation with NRCS and our partners. We've seen it at the farm level. And connect it to a point that Dean made earlier about the climate. I think that these things are not single use, so not single purpose, right? It's the collective value of the environment where you make the investments in conservation, and we see that on water quality. We see it in soil health. We'll see it in the climate as well. But we have under this agreement a job to do. We've made significant progress against that task. We want to make sure that the practices farmers are utilizing on the land are credited accordingly. This is always a point of debate, discussion. Penn State has done, 2 surveys, and I point to them all the time, that the things that we're good at counting are those things the government has paid for. But the largest single investor in conservation is the landowner. There's nothing to do with the program, right? So how do you capture that and bring that practice in and put it on the landscape and make sure it's credited against what we're doing under the Bay and what we said we would do under the WIP 3 for Pennsylvania. So there's a lot inside of that message to say we've made great progress. We've come a long, long way in our effort to meet the 2 co-equal goals of the Bay, and that is clean water and viable farms. We'll say it every time I can. You're not going to get the first without the second. Can't do it. Right. So whatever we can do to make sure that the viable farms are there and those lands are managed, you can meet the water quality goals. If this is only a conversation about point sources, we lose. This is a non-point discussion. And we say to our colleagues all the time in the agricultural community in other states, the scale of this task for us is an indication of the scale and significance of agriculture in our Commonwealth. It's a problem I accept because of what it gives us, right? That's a really important difference between where other states and how they view the work. We'll take this task because we understand with it comes all of these other things that we enjoy. We just have to figure out, how to get the rest of this goal closed, but we'll get there. The farmers have demonstrated every day we'll do it. Conservation districts, the partnership with Penn State, I said at the very beginning, simply wouldn't be where we are without so many people focused on the work of water quality. That has put us in an exceptional position, I think, to make a really good public compelling case about the value of conservation, the way we're positioned in terms of our stewardship and the deep roots of conservation, but also these contemporary issues around climate and the environment are predicated on the stewardship of soil, the stewardship of land. So I think we're in a really good position. We want to pivot that to how do you monetize that benefit for purposes of climate. That's another conversation. It's a place we should be. We've got Penn's Woods in our name, right? Making sure that those forest lands are valued for what they contribute both to conservation and the economy, but also the climate and soil health. So again, a long answer to a really long journey of what's done in water quality, but proud of Pennsylvania and the work that we've done. So thank you.
So on that point about monetizing it is what the Climate Smart Agriculture program was about in building things around the dairy industry and milk. But shortly after, I was very fortunate, shortly after I arrived in 2014, Mary Worth started taking me to the Capitol building, and I started hearing that this was a huge controversial issue that some quarters seemed almost unresolvable. I thought this is something college really needs to get into. And I challenged Jim Shortle and Matt Royer with coming up with a conference that would help look at this. And out of that grew the Pennsylvania Balance, which Mary Seaton's had a huge role in keeping going. It went from a conference to a process. Yeah. And for me, the most sort of encouraging or rewarding thing was out of the very first meeting, it was a very eclectic group from Amish, organic farmers to large commercial farmers and so forth. And quite easily and on their own, out of their own volition, they concluded that the key message that had to be sold to landowners was that the advantages of doing these things for soil health were going to pay for themselves without subsidies. And I thought that's been a watchword for things they've done ever since. So I think we are making a lot of progress, and we're getting there.
Yeah.
So one of the next questions was, what do you see as the role of emerging technology playing in the future of agricultural efficiency, competitiveness, sustainability, and profitability? So one of the things is that we have to use emerging technology to do a lot of this, and it has a wide range of capabilities. We've got people in the college who are really interested in virtual reality and augmented reality, including the prospect they might be able to help deliver veterinary services at a distance by using these kinds of technologies. Maybe a bit more prosaic, we know that labor is increasingly going to be a problem for harvesting fruit, pruning trees, and so forth. And so we have a team of people that are working on that as well to have precision ag in terms of how you can harvest and prune. We've taken on a big role in broadband. So a couple of people in Extension designed an app that allowed you to work out where buildings are served or not served by the internet, made it available to something 13 or 15 companies. And in the first tranche, they brought $368 million in grants to Pennsylvania. And they've done another cycle, has been another $117 million. On top of that, the notoriety grew to the point where the Rockefeller Foundation invested $500,000 into this group to try to make the techniques available more across the rest of the country. So there's a broad range of things the college is involved in terms of using new technologies. It's interesting that I went to a meeting a few years ago that involved the major players in ag chem and seeds and so forth. And after they were talking about all the weird and wonderful things they were doing, I said, what do you think the role of the land grants is in this? And one of them said, well, nothing really, we've got this covered. No. We've heard this before. We've heard about chemical insecticides. We heard with the introduction of transgenic crops. In every case, the universities are the ones that come along and take the promises, check them out, find out whether they really work or not, or figure out how they locally adapt them. So even if you see the big drivers from the major IT companies and so forth, I guarantee you in the long haul, they're going to have to work with all of you to get it actually working properly in the field. So it's not everybody. This is something everybody's going to be playing.
Mm-hmm.
So Secretary, what are the challenges and opportunities do you see on the horizon for PA dairy in the highly competitive market, increased costs of production and hauling? Now, just a sec, before he gets into this, I have to say at one point, we traveled together to Washington to talk about spotted lanternfly. And for the 2 hours down and 2 hours back, what was the one thing we talked about constantly?
Dairy. Yeah, and appropriately so. I think the dairy in Pennsylvania is both a story of opportunity and challenges, right? On the opportunity side, as we mentioned for response to a few other questions, given our proximity where we are, given the 44 inches of natural rainfall, given the productivity of our soils, given you make your long list of infrastructure and people and markets, you can make a compelling case that dairy is here and should stay right here, right? I think that's part of the top line story of opportunity. On the challenge side is making sure that, we are competitive, right? Just because we're here doesn't mean you stay here. We have to make sure that we're competitive, and we have to compete at all levels, farm level, industry level, state level, national level. And when I say that, that means that the cost of production has to, be accounted for. And when you're in a competitive environment like we are with most agricultural industries, what your neighbors do and how they compete and what they can produce for becomes part of the factor to what we do, right? And how we do it. So in a state where dairy has historically been important to us, it's been confirmed by the dairy study that we did some years ago. It's been reconfirmed by the Dairy Futures Commission that the legislature initiated. It's been confirmed by the work that we've done in dairy investments, the Dairy Development Program. It's the Center for Dairy Excellence. There's so many assets that we have and confirm that dairy is important to us. We have to, though, be thinking about what is happening in terms of consumption, right? We are consuming more, and I'll just ask this group: Are you consuming more fluid milk today? Do you drink more milk today than you did 5 years ago? Do you drink more milk today than you did 5 years ago? Just a show of hands, please. Yeah. Related, however, how many folks are eating more cheese and yogurt and ice cream and butter than you did 5 years ago? Right. Yeah. So thank you for that. But that's part of it. Yeah. So that's part of the story, right? I think we have historically been rooted in fluid milk, and our processing capacity across the state reflects that. I'm proud of that. But we also have a society that shifted to they like other things. And we don't have the commensurate sort of processing capacity in those other things. That has been our challenge. That is why we did the dairy study, to say that's where people want, that's the products that they want, it's the form that they want it in. What do we do to make sure that we actually are producing those products, right? So we get the value, we, PA and PA Dairy get the value of that. That is why we made such a hard run at bringing Fairlife here. Right. It's part of the story of making sure that we were competitive, but we wanted to also demonstrate that there's opportunity in dairy. There's a need for further investment in dairy. There's value added product opportunity in dairy. And we think we can meet all of those needs. And we're going to keep pressing. We have the investment for the very first time in our state's history, $120 million for investment in dairy processing in Pennsylvania. 2 years ago, we had zero. We have $120 million today in tax credits to put in directly to dairy processing for Pennsylvania. That would not have happened without the Dairy Futures Commission, the dairy study that we did, the opportunity that was presented to us to compete for the Fairlife, and the recognition inside both the governor's office, the legislature, and the industry that dairy is important to us, right? So again, giving long answers because it's tough to say yes, no to these things. Contextually, dairy is here. We want it to be here. We think it has a bright future here, but it means competing. It means investing. It means thinking about where society is and where they want to be. I use myself as a great example. I now put my cereal in my shirt pocket in the morning. The little cereal bars are my cereal. It's not in a dish. I don't put milk on that. I have to buy the milk in a container. So I think about, I think I'm normal, right? But there's a lot of people who that's their habit. So there is a correlation between cereal consumption and milk consumption, right? And that in society has changed. Stand in the sheets market and see what people drink in beverage for the morning. I am amazed of all the energy that people consume, right? Inside, but that's their milk, right? So they're buying beverages differently. We're consumers, we're human beings, and we've got to respond as an industry to be part of the human beings, right? So making sure that we look at society and we think about the markets, and by the way, making sure that we compete internationally. What is playing out on the global stage because of the unprovoked war in Ukraine is appalling. And the implications for both the human race and what happens to the food system, the dynamics of trade. Look at the evening news, what is happening across this globe, and the reliance that we have as a society and a nation on building markets internationally, and what our partners do, what China does with soybeans and corn and dairy have huge implications for what Pennsylvania produces, right? We are not disconnected from this conversation. And 95% of the available stomachs are someplace other than the United States of America. We're in the food business. We want access to stomachs. Those stomachs, we're 5% of that nation, that world, right? So 95%, where that product goes and how it gets there and what form it's in has huge implications for what we do in Pennsylvania. There's a pesky fly here.
There is.
Anyhow.
So a follow-up question then is what's the status of the PMMB over order premium?
We're making progress. I would say the Pennsylvania Milk Marketing Board, just for context, again, for those who are watching and listening, we're unique in that we have a system in Pennsylvania that allows for what's called an over-order pricing mechanism. Simply put, that allows for the industry to ask consumers to pay a premium to access Pennsylvania produced milk, produced, processed, and sold milk. And those premiums go into a pool that then get distributed to dairy producers in Pennsylvania. So we have something that is important to Pennsylvania. It differentiates us in our dairy industry. We like that connectedness from production to consumption. We like the opportunity to have the consumers, as they make purchases, to the very first question, think about how do you encourage local buying and purchasing. I think that's one of the great opportunities we have. So the short answer is that has been a hotly debated and contested issue because of the actual and perceived beneficiaries of the premium dollars that are generated by that premium. And the belief is, ours included, is that we can do a better job of making sure that the premiums that are collected from our consumers are distributed to the largest base of Pennsylvania producers possible, right? And we believe that we ask as a Commonwealth, this is law. This isn't about, the Department of Agriculture or somebody just saying this would be a great program. This is law. And the law says that, if you're going to sell milk in Pennsylvania, it's going to carry the premium, consumers are going to pay, and it's going to go back to producers. But it only applies if the milk is produced, processed, and sold in Pennsylvania. So all of that milk that folks are buying that come from out of state comes into our marketplace. The retailer, by the way, charges the state mandated premium, but has no obligation to remit that premium that you pay as consumers back into the pool. So there are dollars that are generated because of state law that are leaving the Commonwealth and go back to where that milk is produced or processed in PA. We're trying to change that. So State Senate, Senator Vogel and Senator Judy Schwenk, hearing in April, Milk Marketing Board is on board. We're focused on stage 2. And stage 2 is now, how do you collect that differently? And how do you distribute those premiums differently to make sure that we honor the covenant that's been set forth by state law that requires consumers to pay. And we are failing at the requirement to return it to Pennsylvania producers because of the dynamics inside this market. So we left a lot of money on the table that leaves Pennsylvania because it doesn't meet the 3-part test, trying to tighten it up so we have a direct connect between production and consumption of Pennsylvania dairy in Pennsylvania.
Thank you. The last submitted question was about what are the budget risks you foresee impacting the College of Ag and Penn State extension over the next 1 to 5 years? And our biggest challenge, I think, is state funding. We have really great friends in the legislature, but the discontinuity of when the funding is going to arrive or not and so forth is a challenge for us, both on the land script side, which affects extension, but for the so-called education general funds for the university, which also get held up on the 2/3 majority vote rule. So the problem for us is planning, and it often means that we're out of the market at the ideal time to get the best new employees. We're out of the market because our funding is tied up. So one of our biggest challenges really is consistency of funding. So we can not have delays in our hiring or giving cost of living raises to our faculty and so forth. So that's our biggest challenge. We've pretty much run out of time. I just want to point out that at 1 p.m. today, there's Growing the Next Generation of PDA panel, which I think encourage people to come for. And in the same room tomorrow at 10 a.m., there's a session on Farm Bill where I'll also be speaking in more detail about the Farm Bill things that I did today. So with that, I really want to thank again Secretary Redding for joining us. And I always enjoy our conversations, even on long car rides. Partnering with PDA. And I also thank all of you who come here in person and those who are participating by Zoom. We really appreciate your interest and support of our college. And I hope that you'll get a chance to visit all the exhibits at Ag Progress Day and enjoy your day. It looks like we have spectacularly good weather this year for the first time in a while. So enjoy. Thank you all for coming.
Thanks, everybody.